Well, look, let's talk to our first guest of this hour about this and various other stories very much linked to that. Ben Habib is former deputy leader of Reform UK and joins us. Very, very good afternoon to you, Ben.
Good afternoon.
Your reaction to the news, it was announced at midday that the government is going to basically hand back that £300 annual winter fuel payment to most of the pensioners they took it away from. If you're earning 35 grand a year or more, you won't get it, but everyone else will. Means tested, and lots of the pensioners who really did lose out last winter are going to get it back. Do you welcome that news?
I do welcome the news. I mean, I'm not in favour generally of increasing the size of state spending, but I absolutely welcome that news when you consider all the other endeavours on which the state has been splurging money, including in your opening remarks for this segment. You cited the £4.5 billion being spent on illegal migrants in hotels. If we can afford that, we can certainly afford to look after our elderly. And I think the bill was meant to be £1.5 billion in order to reinstate this this privilege. And as Sam rightly said, these are people who've paid their taxes all their lives. And there was a social contract. There is a social contract which repeatedly gets trounced between the government and the people on various issues. And as far as pensioners are concerned, this was part of that social contract. The WASPy women, another really good example where we were told all our lives you could retire at a particular age, and then they suddenly moved the goalposts. But I can tell you something if Sam is listening. In 1989, when I was 24 years old, I could smell the direction of travel for pensions. And I decided then that I wouldn't waste money paying my well-earned income into a pension in the hope that the government would eventually allow me to get it back. I could see even then they were beginning to change the goalposts.
Or also you'd be penalised if you do save. And again, we see this again and again. Look, let me bring on to you, mentioned this about the cost of these migrant hotels, front page of The Sun today, pointing out, and these are figures that have been put together by the statistics expert, Jamie Jenkins, big friend of the show. And it's when these stats are put to us in this sort of format, it makes them easier to understand, because we talk about, millions and billions. I mean, it sort of becomes meaningless, doesn't it? But he's pointed out that the £4.7 billion annual bill to keep migrants in hotels and hostels and look after them makes every single penny of tax from 582,000 workers for the whole year. That is the equivalent to the entire population of Manchester. So if you're in Manchester, equivalent, you go to work today, you get your the pay, you get your net pay, the gross pay. You go, good Lord, how much have I paid? All that money has gone to pay for migrants in hotels, illegal migrants. It is absolutely extraordinary, these numbers, isn't it?
It's horrendous. And the figure that you've got, I'm sure, is a fraction actually of the real figure. They hide the real figures. And by my own calculation, the 100,000 or so people that are effectively living off the state illegally must be costing well over £50,000 a year. We can't keep people in prison for less than £50,000 a year. And so these people are not in prison. They're in 5-star, 4-star hotels.
I think they got them out. They got them out of the 5 and 4 stars. They have to be in something lower grade. Okay. They won't pay for it. But again, it has a massive impact on local communities, even if they're in hostels, even if they're in private accommodation. As we know, that simply takes up private accommodation that's no longer available to a British family.
Exactly. And then there's all the knock-on effects on our infrastructure, and the real impact is obviously what it does for our culture in this country.
Hold on a minute. Wait a minute. I'm going to have to refer you to Prevent. If you're concerned about mass immigration, if you are concerned about the culture of our country and the impact on that, it is very likely you're at risk of becoming a terrorist and you need to be de-radicalised.
That is remarkable, isn't it? That Prevent...
So official document on the Home Office website.
Refused to recognise the threat that Axel Rudakabana posed to society, and yet would arrest, presumably, someone like you and someone like me.
Yeah, most of my audience.
Yeah, I'm waiting for the knock on the door.
I mean, come and get me. I'm just saying, I've said to Toby Young a little bit earlier, it would be actually, let's all go in the same week to be de-radicalised. That re-education camp is going to be an absolute hoot. All the best people. What do you make, by the way, and talking on the migration issue, what do you make of what's happening in America, those LA riots where Gavin Newsom, the Democrat California governor, is criticised as immoral Donald Trump's decision to send in the National Guard to try and quell the, quote, largely peaceful, they're always largely peaceful protests, where we've seen, you know, cars being burnt, you know, whole highway being closed down, and people being, you know, officers being pelted with rocks and other ammunition.
Well, Donald Trump is trying to reverse the direction of travel that we are still set on, which is this preparedness to, effectively protect, promote just about any individual in the United Kingdom, in his case, in the United States, that isn't a British citizen or an American citizen. You know, that seems to be our approach to governance. And he's absolutely right that he should be cracking down on it. It's sad that that kind of draconian police presence is required, but it's symptomatic of years and years of bad governance. Of course, we need a holistic approach, and at the risk of irritating Prevent again, we need to dramatically reduce migration into our respective countries. We need to stop illegal migration. We need to grow the backbone required to deport people. We need to prevent people who've come to this country either illegally or illegally, frankly, at the moment, with the mass migration taking place, from getting indefinite leave to remain, and so on and so forth. And en route to that, if we're going to have the kind of trouble that they've got in California, then sadly, we will have to take draconian measures. It would be much better to get a grip of the root problems so that we don't have to take those draconian measures. But if that happens, then you've got to do it.
Yeah.
And
again,
you know,
it's utterly bizarre. And again, the support for Donald Trump on this issue is actually across party. It's very interesting. Can I bring you on to where we are with Reform, your old party, one of the many people who have left working with Nigel Farage over the years? We saw Zia Youssef, the chairman, resign in a fit of pique over this question. Sarah Pouchin, the new Reform MP, asked at PMQs last week about banning the burqa. It was kind of a bit of a where did that come from moment. He then back within the party within 48 hours after praise was heaped on him, people asking him to stay. What do you make of what is going on at Reform right now? Has this damaged the party? Why do you think that Zia Youssef did leave, and why do you think he's back in the fold?
So, just a couple of things. The first thing that was remarkable, I think, is that Reform didn't have a settled view on the question of the burqa, because
I was surprised by that.
Yeah, it's very surprising to me because, you know, fundamentally it correctly stands against multiculturalism, you know, the promotion, protection and celebration of all these different cultures that have come to the United Kingdom. It stands against that, and therefore should have a view on the burqa, apart from the fact that the burqa, in my view, is the most obvious rejection of British culture, which includes the emancipation of women at its heart. And this is the outward representation of the repression of women. And so I would have thought it had a settled position on the burqa. And that it irritated Zia Youssef so much tells me that they haven't really given thought to the political philosophy that the party has. And that's been one of my criticisms, frankly, of Farage, that he's terrific at reading the room and where the media wants him to go, but he doesn't really have a settled political, philosophical framework. That's the first thing. Okay. The second thing is, the party doesn't have a structure and a constitution, checks and balances and processes, about which I've been very critical, which would have prohibited her asking a question in PMQs about which the chairman was unaware, and would have prohibited the chairman in turn from tweeting something that was against her. And, you know, they need to grow up and develop policies internally that control themselves.
A grown-up political party,
Absolutely. And then the third thing here, which is, leads on from Zia's return, is what the devil is going on at the top of the party. If this man was exhausted, as they say he was, and he needed a break or whatever, he can't just come back 48 hours later. And there's something very odd in the relationship between Nigel Farage and Zia Youssef. Nigel Farage is not there is, because Nigel Farage, historically, I don't think there's a single individual to whom you can point who's left the party and Nigel hasn't absolutely trounced, and including myself. But with Zia Youssef, he was quite reluctant for Zia Youssef to go, and he welcomed him back with open arms. So it's a teacher pet kind of thing going on. I don't know what it is, but it's a bit weird.
Maybe he understands the key role that Zia Youssef has played. But there we are. Ben Habib, very interesting, former deputy leader of Reform UK.